Good morning, everybody. It's Jesse, and I'm back again for another installment of Social School. What we are going to be doing today is we are going to be talking about kind of in keeping with the unit and social awareness, understanding the feelings of others. We're going to be talking about nonverbal communication, which is basically all the things that, have to do with communication or expressing ourselves, understanding the feelings of others that do not have to do with the actual words that people say. And so when I introduced this lesson, I kind of talked about, how good are you at reading people? How good are you at reading social situations? And if they say that you should never judge a book by its cover, then when we look at people and we try to read them, if we look at the pages, what really makes up a person? It is their behavior, their actions. And if you really want to understand another person or their feelings, we have to look at this nonverbal communication. Again, all the things that a person is expressing to us that may or may not have anything to do with the actual words they say. And so I'm going to get into it. I'm going to show you guys some things. Hopefully we'll get some good examples. Want to thank everybody, for watching this video in advance. Appreciate your time and looking forward to another good video. What we have in front of us is kind of an overview of the points that I want to make for today. You'll notice some key terms are underlined: attunement, nonverbal communication, paraverbals, and lastly, verbal communication. And so where it starts off with is this thing called attunement, paying attention or tuning into the people around you, and then knowing how to respond appropriately. And the truth of the matter is, if you want to know how to react in a social situation, in a workplace situation, you have to pay attention to what's going on to those people. And so we want to kind of, like I said, tune in to those people or pay attention to them in an effort to kind of understand them better. And if you look at this, the biggest section of the three is what is called nonverbal communication. And if you've ever had a speech class or those sorts of things, you're familiar with this word. But basically what it means is sending and receiving wordless messages, usually visual, that messages that are sent between people. And there are going to be some key areas that we look at. Things like body language, posture, gestures, how people touch one another, facial expressions, and eye contact. And when you put this whole thing into a package, that is really the best way to understand the feelings of someone else, is to look at what they do and how they act as opposed to what they say. We get into the next section, and this is called paraverbals, and this is probably not anything that you've ever heard of before. But paraverbals basically are how you say what you want or need to say. And it has to do with things like tone of voice, your pitch, how loud you are, cadence, those sorts of things. And it's the difference between, saying something like, "Hey, how you doing?" and "Hey, how you doing?" And then the last one, the smallest of these, is verbal communication. And it's communication that is actually about the words that we use. And so this includes text messages and letters and all those things. But it's really about the words that people use. And the point that I want to make here is that if you look at, the three different types of communication, verbal communication is actually the smallest one. And the reason for that is that people have a tendency, here's a newsflash for you, people have a tendency to lie with their words. You may ask them, "Hey, how are you doing?" And they'll be like, "Oh, I'm fine." And you can tell by listening to their words that they probably don't mean it. So if you really want to know about the feelings of another human being, you're going to have to learn more about this nonverbal communication and paraverbal communication. So a quick word about attunement. What we need to do is we need to start really paying attention to the people around us. They, for the most part, are going to be the most important things. They are your customers, they are your coworkers, they are your bosses. tuning in or paying attention to these people around you is going to be absolutely essential in knowing how to act around them, how to interact with them, and eventually how to deal with them even when, they're being difficult. And so if you're like me and you're one of those people who maybe has some attention issues, this is going to be a challenge for you, right? So I'll be honest, I've been labeled with ADD and I do struggle with paying attention, but because I pay attention to people and try to really find out what's going on with them, then that puts me in a better position to understand them, to see what's going on with them, and then eventually to be able to interact with them. And so we have to tune in. We have to pay attention. And as hard as this might be, or as little as you really want to do it, this is really going to be a first step for us. And so where it starts, the first thing that you want to pay attention to is you want to pay attention to nonverbal communication. And the reason for this is that, people are not always talking to you. They're not always telling you something. But at the same time, in actual words, they may not be telling you, but their body language, their posture, their facial expressions, the eye contact that they give you is constantly communicating. People communicate by the clothes that they wear, the way that they do their hair, and those sorts of things. And they're always kind of trying to communicate in one way or another. And, nonverbal communication is the biggest part of anyone's communication. And if you think about this, you don't always talk to everyone that you see, but at the same time, you are always communicating through these different areas. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to break them down into their different sections and see if we can't make something out of this. Whether they are talking to you or not, people are constantly communicating to you, constantly expressing their feelings through their body language. And as you look at the pictures below, you see this guy, and you can kind of tell, from each of these pictures how he feels based on his body language, right? Is he shocked? Is he amazed? Is he confused? Does he want you to call him? How is this guy feeling? And as you look at this, you can tell from that body language, or if you're good at this, you can tell from that body language how he's feeling. My students are constantly communicating with me, and if I want to know what's really going on with them, I have to look at their body language. Because I ask most kids, hey, how's it going? And they're like, oh, I'm fine, it's all good, everything's fine. But as class goes on, I can tell really who's paying attention and who's not, or who wants to talk to me and who doesn't by their body language. I've got a posture, actually, that looks something like this, and I refer to this one as the talking to me, because when somebody, has got their head down like this and their hand is over their face, then I can tell probably who doesn't really want to hear what I have to say. But if somebody is leaning in, if somebody, is kind of got their eyes open and they're ready to learn, then I can tell from that body language. Or if somebody walks into class, and they've got their head down and they're like this, then that's definitely different than if somebody skips and hops and jumps into the class, and I can just kind of feel that energy on them. And the way that I do that, the way that I read that is by looking at body language. And so this is probably the best way really to tell how people, feel, because people will, here's a newsflash, people will lie with their words. They'll tell you that they're okay when they're not, or that, things are good. But if you look at somebody's body language, the way that they carry themselves, here's another real good example. When people are confident, they've got their head up, they're stretched out, they're all, ready to go, they feel good. But when people are scared, when people are nervous, they kind of have a tendency to crunch themselves over like this. And it's just, it conveys a lot of anxiety. And so we want to pay attention to body language, again, because it is probably the primary way that people communicate their feelings. Another really good way that people communicate with each other without words is something called gestures. And you may have noticed that I am one of those people who likes to talk with their hands. And even in this video so far, I've probably had more than a few gestures. And there are all kinds of gestures that you might see in the workplace. And you have to be able to read the difference between those gestures. So there's something as simple as, hey, come here. And then there's the, hey, come here. And even though those two gestures for some people might mean the same thing, they feel a little bit different. And so there are all kinds of gestures, again, that you'll see in the workplace. For me personally, a gesture that's big with me is I'll give people the peace sign. Usually means, hey, I'm out, or a salute sometimes if I'm seeing somebody from a distance. And these gestures really communicate. Now, there is American Sign Language, which is an entire language that is developed entirely around, gestures. But even for people who don't speak sign language, these gestures still are a very clear way of communicating. And the best example that I can think of is, flipping somebody the bird. And if we look at that or we think about it, there's all different kinds of birds, right? So there's this one, I'm so mad at you, right? And then, for some of us, we use that gesture, we use it with our friends, and so we look at a simple gesture like that, and depending on some of the other things that go with that gesture, we have to read, is this person really angry with us? Are they just joking around? We have to be able to understand or read some of the other factors that go in if we want to understand these gestures. And so while a gesture, for the most part, can very clearly communicate, we have to look at it a little bit deeper and kind of understand what else is going on with a person when we see gestures. The next one that I want to talk about is touch. And you can gain so much information about people and how they feel about each other through the way they touch. You see this in handshakes and high fives, although that's much less common now in COVID. But when you really look at the way that people touch each other, there's a lot of communication there. And so the way that, you shake a person's hand, or, there's just so much meaning that can come from touching. And so if you put your hand on someone's shoulder, maybe you're trying to, console them after they've had a bad day, or there are hugs. If you look at the pictures here, you see all different kinds of touching. And in each one of these pictures, it is very clear that a different kind of emotion is being conveyed. And so on the one hand, you have these people who are all putting their hands in the center and are trying to convey, their teamwork, their sense of unity. And in the bottom right-hand corner, you see that woman is definitely very clearly communicating to that man in a different way. And all of these things are happening through the way that people touch each other. It is definitely worth paying attention to, and it was definitely worth talking about in terms of this video. So the next category that I want to talk about are facial expressions and eye contact. And if they say that the eyes are the windows to the soul, someone's eyes really are the best way to tell how they're really feeling. We look at these pictures, is that guy confused? Is the woman really happy, or is she nervous? Is that, guy in the bottom left-hand corner, is he shocked? Is he surprised? The guy at the bottom with his Home Alone face. Or that girl in the bottom right-hand corner, I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, she's probably thinking, did you really just say that to me? So she's kind of like in shock about the whole thing. And so we look at faces, and people's faces really are going to tell us so much about how they're feeling and what's going on with them. When we start to look at people's faces, we do need to be careful though, because it is very easy to misread, and there are a couple of things that I want to talk about, because just because someone is smiling does not mean that they are necessarily happy, and just because someone has this look on their face does not mean that they're upset or there's something wrong. So I'll teach you a little something here. Did you know that there are over 250 different kinds of smiles? There are researchers who have spent countless hours in front of a mirror just looking at all the different kinds of smiles. And if you think about it, it's really true. So there's like my smile when I'm smiling for a picture. And then there's the kind of smile that says maybe I'm not up to something that's very nice or very good. And so again, just because someone's smiling does not necessarily mean that they're happy. And also at this point, I usually address something called RBF. And if you're not familiar with RBF, it stands for resting face. And so I'm one of those examples. So this is the face that my mother gave me. And if I don't smile on purpose, it looks like there's something wrong. And very often people will ask me, "Oh, Jesse, what's wrong? What's going on with you? Are you tired? What's happening?" And I'm like, "No, that's just my face. It's the way that I was born." And so if I don't consciously smile, if I don't take the effort to really try to get a real smile, then I just have that face. And so knowing the person that you're looking at also is very helpful. Because if somebody is ordinarily very smiley and then, they give you one of these, then maybe something's wrong. Or if somebody, has this face, they might be perfectly fine and that's just their face. If you've ever heard the phrase, it's not what someone says, it's how they say it, then you are familiar with the concept of paraverbal communication. And paraverbal communication are all the things about the way a person talks that are not their specific words. It's not the words that they say, it's how they say them. And they include things like pitch, volume, cadence, which is the rhythm of how people talk, and then also someone's tone. So you have to listen to someone's tone of voice and how they put emphasis on words if you really want to understand the emotional meaning behind what they say. And if you look at my example that I've got down here, there are 3 sentences that have the exact same words but have 3 very different meanings. In the first one, it says, "I didn't say you were stupid." And what that means is that even though I didn't say you were stupid, I still think that you're probably stupid. In the next one, it says, "I didn't say you were stupid," which means maybe they think that somebody else is acting dumb or doing the wrong thing. And in the last one, it says, "I didn't say you were stupid," which means that maybe they didn't agree with you, but they weren't trying to insult you, they weren't saying something wrong, or that you were saying something wrong. And so, the exact same words in 3 different sentences can mean 3 totally different things. If you've ever had somebody, maybe it was your parent, who said, "Don't take that tone with me," then maybe you do understand a little bit more about paraverbals than you thought. Because when we look at how a person says what they say, there's really a lot of emotional information there. And the way that we break this down, there are 4 kind of categories that I look at. I look at the pitch, which is how high or how low someone's voice gets. Volume, which is how loud or how soft people talk. Cadence is, the rhythm that people talk with. And the last one is tone, your tone of voice. Those are kind of like the 4 categories. So when I look at pitch, how high or how low someone's voice is definitely communicates feeling. So if somebody talks to me like this and, "Oh my God, Jesse, I'm so happy to see you," then, that may indicate that they're excited. I've known some people, though, and I am one of those, who, when I take that really high-pitched tone, I might be saying something like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you said that," and my voice goes up high. And so, how high or how low your voice is sometimes communicates feeling. Or I've known PE teachers who, had this low, deep voice, and they say, "Mr. Allen, you need to come in my office right now." And they get real low, and, it's trying to be like serious or imposing, those kind of things. And then, we look at volume, and how loud someone is definitely communicates emotion, because sometimes people get loud when they're surprised. Sometimes people get really loud when they're angry. For the most part, I also will get really loud. I talk fast, I talk loud, when I'm angry. But I've known some people who talk like this, and those people sometimes kind of scare me. One time, I will share this with you. One time, I worked in the alternative school, And I had a kid he walked up behind me, and what he said to me is, "Mr. Allen, I know where you live." And that really freaked me out, right? So by being real soft, by being real quiet, he was threatening me, right? He told me, he's like, "I know where you live," and he was threatening me just with his volume. The next one is cadence, and cadence is like the rhythm that you speak with, and this is most obvious when we look at people's accents. Maybe you can tell where someone comes from based on their accent. And so they say that, people from the South are a little bit more laid back, they're a little bit more slow, and they talk like this, "How y'all doing?" Where it's just kind of like that slow, easy wave, it's very relaxed. The rhythm of their speech all by itself is much more slow and relaxed, whereas somebody who's uptight, a little anxious, or from the city would be like, "Oh my God, I'm late, I gotta catch my bus and get that latte." And when people have that real sharp speech, not only does it convey emotion, but a lot of times people will pick up on it. And if people are uptight or they talk in that real loud, punchy way, when they do those things, then that cadence definitely is communicating emotion. And then the last one that I want to talk about, because it's probably the most important or the best of the paraverbals to tell, is the tone that people use. And with this one, we have to be on the lookout for sarcasm. And if you don't know what sarcasm is when you say one thing, but you actually mean the opposite. It's the difference between, "Hey man, good job," and "Hey man, good job," right? And so that sarcasm can get people in a lot of trouble. One time I had a student who lost his job because he did not understand sarcasm. And so what happened was, this kid was running late for work. He was already nervous, already upset, and he walked into work, and his boss, noticed that he was late to work, didn't really say anything, and he went to apologize to his boss, and his boss was like, "You're fired," and meant it as a joke, right? He was joking with his student, but with his worker, but the student didn't get it, and he thought that he was actually fired. And so the student flipped out, started arguing, started yelling, and then ended up getting fired for yelling at his boss and not really for being late. And so you have to really listen to the words that people say, obviously, but you also have to listen to how they say what they say if you really want to understand their emotional meaning. And as I get into the videos that I'm going to do next, the next few videos are going to be the importance of listening in developing social skills. And we're going to talk about something called empathic learning in the next video. So I know this one was a little bit longer, but there's lots and lots of good information in nonverbal communication and paraverbal communication. So thank you everybody for tuning in. I appreciate your time so much, and I hope that all of you have a great week.